This is the new Mercedes-AMG GT Black Series, and it's amazing, a true supercar. It has 720 horsepower and it costs almost $400,000 with options. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Porsche 911 GT3 RS, which sold for over $230,000 in gorgeous RS green. This E92 BMW M3 Lime Rock Edition, which brought almost $60,000. And this Ferrari 360 Spider, which sold for over $71,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with daily auctions and great selection at carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this AMG GT Black Series from Mercedes-Benz of Temecula, which is the Mercedes dealership here in Temecula, north of San Diego. Mercedes-Benz of Temecula has a great selection of new and pre-owned Mercedes-Benz models, including the AMG GT Black Series, which has been tremendously difficult to track down, but they have one here at Mercedes-Benz of Temecula. So let's talk AMG GT Black Series. By now, you probably know the AMG GT. I've reviewed a few of them. It's Mercedes sports car, and there are several different models. There's the regular AMG GT, then there's the GTC, then there's the GTS, then there's the track-focused GTR, and then they recently came out with the GTR Pro, which we all thought would be the end because it looks insane and it has 580 horsepower. And then came the Black Series. Mercedes revived the Black Series name that they haven't used in more than 5 years to create the most insane AMG GT yet. And just look at it, massive wing and fender vents, it just looks mean, which of course it is. Like I said, 720 horsepower, lighter weight, the ultimate version of this car. When Mercedes first came out with the Black Series name years ago, they said they would reserve it for the ultimate AMG models, essentially street legal race cars. And that's this. And today I'm going to review it. First, I'll take you on a thorough tour of the AMG GT Black Series and show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, which sounds terrifying, and then I'll give it a Doug score. Let's get started. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the AMG GT Black Series by discussing some of the differences between this and other AMG GT models, and I'm going to start up front specifically with this massive diffuser. This carbon fiber diffuser along the bottom of the front end is huge, and it's manually adjustable. You can manually adjust the angle of this diffuser to change how air flows around it to maybe get you an extra 1/10 of a second on the racetrack. That's the level of racetrack focus we're talking about with this car. Also up front, you can see canards along the sides, again to help direct airflow. Only the most serious track-focused cars and race cars have this, and the GT Black Series does. And of course up front, probably the most noticeable change is the grille, which is larger than in other AMG GT models, of course, because it needs to bring in more air. Now, also different up here compared to regular AMG GT models, you can see on the hood, you have these giant swaths of carbon fiber on each side of the hood, and they kind of curve down in front to become nostrils, which gives this car a more aggressive look and definitely a distinctive one compared to regular AMG GTs. Speaking of holes up front, you also have on the fenders these fender vents, 6 different fender vents on each side to help dissipate heat from the engine on hot track days. You're doing many laps, the engine needs to cool off as much as possible, so vents like this help make that happen. And by the way, speaking of the hood and the front fenders, they're carbon fiber. That's another change compared to the regular AMG GT models. They've gone with carbon fiber for some of the body panels, the hood, the fenders, to make this car lighter. And of course, a lighter weight means more speed, so converting the hood and the fenders to carbon fiber helps you go faster. And the hood and the front fenders aren't the only body panels that have been converted to carbon fiber in order to save weight. That's also true of the tailgate. The tailgate has also been changed to carbon fiber, again, in a weight savings move to help this car be lighter and thus faster. But undoubtedly the biggest deal back here, the biggest new important thing, is the wing. This is a massive rear wing, of course unique to the Black Series model, and it really is huge. Incredibly wide, and it's 2 levels of wing. You can see the top part of the wing in carbon fiber, and there's also a second lower level of the wing also in carbon fiber, of course intended to provide as much downforce as possible. Mercedes-Benz says up to 900 pounds of downforce at top speed, which is pretty good. And around back, it isn't just the wing that's a crazy addition to the Black Series car. You also have a massive rear diffuser back here, again mostly in carbon fiber, and it is just huge, incredibly wide, and contains the quad exhaust that AMG cars are so well known for. And there's more to cover on the outside of this car than just what's up front and in back. On previous Black Series models, a hallmark has been wider bodies. These cars have had wider fenders. The CLK Black Series was famous for it. Same with the SL65 Black Series, sort of a wider, more muscular design. Well, that's also true of this car. It's a little wider than the regular AMG GT, and you can see in the fender, there's actually a fender vent that accentuates this extra width that the regular AMG GT doesn't have. For even more width, you can see the rocker panels down here in carbon fiber, of course, and they give it kind of a more muscular, bulkier look around the side. Now, also worth noting on the side of this car is the brakes. This comes standard with carbon ceramic brakes, which of course help reduce brake fade on the racetrack. But anyway, back to the rear of the Black Series for a few subtle little exterior quirks. One is the Black Series badge, which I love. You can see it says GT, but under that Black Series with a little checkered flag. Pretty subtle considering how much of an upgrade this car is compared to the regular AMG GT models. And it doesn't say Black Series anywhere else on the outside. You just kind of have to know. One interesting item within the taillight, you can see integrated into the reflector on the side, the AMG badge is printed right there. A little reminder of what you're driving. And it's the same deal up front. On the side of the headlights in front, you can see another little AMG badge. So Mercedes is reminding you that you got the AMG, even in the tiny little details in the headlights and taillights, which is kind of a cool touch. But anyway, next up we climb inside the Black Series, and I gotta say, your first impression is it is pretty amazing in here. Everything in this interior is like Alcantara with nice orange stitching to match the outside. You have it on the dashboard, you have it on the door panels, and it looks very nice. There's also a lot of carbon fiber accents in here. For instance, around the climate vents in the center, it looks very luxurious and race car in one, which I suspect is precisely what they're going for in this interior. For a good example of this car's race carness, when you go to close the door from the inside, you don't pull a regular door puller, but instead you pull a strap. This strap here, you can see it. It's still stitched in orange to give you that hint of luxury, but it is a strap nonetheless to remind you of the seriousness of your hardcore Black Series model. And speaking of kind of the race carness of this car, one thing I really like is the steering wheel. For one thing, it's completely Alcantara, which isn't great for wear, but it does help you on the racetrack. If your hands are sweaty doing a lot of laps on a hot day, Alcantara won't slip around like leather will, and so that's what you want. The wheel is also not completely circular. Instead, it's a little square on the sides and on the bottom, just like a race car steering wheel, which feels cool. And at the bottom of the wheel, it also says AMG Black Series, your only other reminder that you're in a Black Series car, aside from that badge on the back. They've kept it pretty subtle, at least in terms of badging. But anyway, next up, one feature I really like in these AMG GT models is the fact that the buttons are all screens. You push them and they still feel like buttons, but the cool part is they can change. So when you turn something on, you don't get like a light in your gauge cluster or your dashboard, but the button itself changes. Let me show you what I mean here in the center console. Over on the left side, you have 4 of these like screen buttons and switches. The top one is a switch that adjusts your drive modes, and you can see here, as you go through the various drive mode, the screen next to the switch actually changes to correspond with what you're doing. And you can see Comfort, Sport, Sport Plus, and there's even a race mode with a checkered flag, and they all appear here on your little button. Now, you move down from there, and the next button controls the transmission. And its default setting, you're in D for just drive automatically, but if you press it, it switches to M for manual mode, and you can see the little image there changes as well. Your next button down adjusts your suspension settings, and it's the same deal. You can change your suspension harshness and see the picture change in this button. And at the bottom, you have your stability control button. You tap that, and it adjusts how aggressive your stability control is. You can kind of toggle it on or off, which is pretty cool. Now, over on the right side of the center console, again, more of these screen changing buttons and switches. Your top one here is for stereo volume. You can move this switch up or down, and you can see plus or minus actually appears in the screen to correspond with how you've moved the switch, which is kind of a neat touch. And below that, you have the auto start stop feature where the car will turn itself off at stoplights or if you're just sitting, and you can toggle that on or off with this button. The next two buttons here are rather important ones. The upper one controls the rear wing. It can change the angle of the rear wing, again, to adjust airflow around it and thus adjust downforce and change your track driving abilities. You tap that and you can see the wing do its thing and actually make a change, which you can control from inside the car using this button, and that is pretty cool. The button right below the little wing button, that is for your exhaust. You press that and you can cycle between the regular exhaust, or you can turn on the sport exhaust and really hear it. Take a listen to this car with its sport exhaust turned on. It sounds pretty good. Now, interestingly, the screen buttons in this interior are not just limited to the center console. There are also a few on the steering wheel, which is kind of cool, although they're strangely redundant. The one over on the right of the steering wheel, this is actually a little dial, and you can twist it to adjust your drive mode, just like that little switch positioned only maybe 12 inches away on the center console. You can do your drive mode selecting in either place, but both are right within fingertips reach, and it's kind of strange to have both of them there. Same deal on the left side of the steering wheel. You have two more little screen buttons coming off the center of the steering wheel. One adjusts your stability control. Again, you can toggle it on or off here, just like you could do with that button on the left side of the center console. So again, a little bit redundant. You also have a button here coming off the steering wheel that allows you to turn on the camera system for the car in case you're about to park it. But that's redundant too, because there's a camera button mounted on the ceiling, kind of next to the rear view mirror. You tap that and it has the same function and turns on the cameras. So you do have these kind of cool screen buttons on the steering wheel, but you have backup buttons for all that stuff pretty close by. But next up, I'm going to go back to turning off the stability control in this car. Now, in the default setting, of course, the stability control is on, but if you tap one of the stability control buttons, the one in the center or the one on the steering wheel, you can see that turns it off. And now it's off, sort of. If you hold down the stability control button, then it completely turns off. It doesn't just go into a sort of off mode, it's gone. And now you're really ready for some track driving if you think you know what you're doing. The interesting thing, though, that happens when you turn off stability control is this yellow dial in the center is now active. This allows you to adjust your traction control. And you have several different adjustments that you can do that allow you to dial up or down your traction control depending on how good of a driver you really think you are. And yes, you can turn traction control all the way off too after you've already turned off stability control if you really think you know what you're doing. But I wouldn't really recommend it, especially in a car like this. And next up, another interesting item in this interior is the seats, which are these cool, grippy bucket seats with orange trim to match the exterior. They look very good and very tight. They'll keep you in place on the racetrack, but they aren't as tight as the seats this car gets in Europe, where it's offered with carbon fiber bucket seats that are even more aggressive. And European models can also come with a racing harness from the factory. Unfortunately, that's not available in the States for regulatory reasons. Instead, we have to get the usual 3-point seatbelt, as you can see, but you still do get some pretty nice sport seats in this car. And directly behind the sport seats, you can see another interesting item in here, and that would be this carbon fiber crossbar. This is added for chassis rigidity, trimmed in carbon fiber to look cool. It's a $1,600 option to get this, but it's a nice look inside the car, and it makes you feel even sportier. And speaking of sporty, next we move on to the infotainment system, which has a track pace app that allows you to measure and time various things on the racetrack. You can tell the car when you're about to enter a new racetrack or save a prior one, and you can monitor your lap times and set new lap times and see how you've done on previous laps on that same track, which is pretty cool. You can also monitor telemetry from this app, so you can check out like your speed, your steering angle, all that sort of stuff while you drive along, which could be pretty helpful for improving your lap times when you're on the racetrack. My very favorite thing in here, though, is that you can actually set it up for a drag racing mode, and then it will measure your acceleration, I guess 0 to 60 or quarter mile. So you get it into drag race mode and go, and then the car will measure how fast you're accelerating using this track pace app, which is a pretty cool feature in the infotainment system and kind of expected in an ultra track focused special car like this one. And since we're talking about screens, I should mention the gauge cluster, which is in fact also a screen, very large, very high resolution, and quite configurable. You can change what you're seeing in the center of the gauge cluster, and you can move over to the side and change what you're seeing over there on the right. You can see the tachometer, but also various other different things like a map or car settings or information if you want to change it. With that said, I have to say this car is definitely starting to show its age a little bit, which may not make sense since it's a brand new car, but that's kind of the thing about these Black Series models. They come at the very end of the production run for each model that has been Black Series-ified. And so by the time the Black Series comes out, the car is usually starting to feel pretty old, and that's certainly true here. For example, that infotainment system is like 3 Mercedes infotainment systems ago. It's not a touchscreen. You have to control it with this little pad in the center, which is a little disappointing compared to how good MBUX is in the modern cars. And it's not just that. You have your old school Mercedes-Benz gear lever. I don't think they're using this in any other models anymore, but they're using it here. You have your old Mercedes turn signal stalk lever coming off the steering column. Again, looks and feels old. This lever, I think, is more than 10 years old. And it's the same deal with some of the switch gear in here. You can see the window switches. This feels like old school, kind of cheap Mercedes-Benz. They use this in C-classes and GLKs. And it's also true with these buttons on the ceiling that I showed you before. They look old, they feel old, and there are several blanks. It just doesn't look all that good or all that modern compared to newer Mercedes-Benz models. You even have the old school key. This thing, this old Mercedes key that they've been using for over a decade. They've ditched this for almost all of the new cars, but not this one. So again, kind of feels a little old in some key areas, which is a little disappointing, especially at this price point and for such a special car to not have some of the newest goodies. And by the way, speaking of the key, one interesting item with the key, if you open up the center console, you can look back here and see there's a key slot in here. And in fact, you can stick the key in here and turn the car on. This is an ignition switch for this car. Now, it isn't the only ignition. Instead, there's a button to the right of the steering wheel. Like in a lot of cars, you press that and that starts the engine. But in case that button fails, you can use this little key slot in the center console as a backup. So you have like a second key slot in there just to be sure you can get your car started. Kind of an odd thing, and only possible because of this old school Mercedes-Benz key. But then again, maybe having the most modern interior goodies doesn't really matter much because you have the thing that's most important, and that would be the performance in this car, and specifically the engine, which is fantastic. This is the same 4-liter twin-turbo V8 that's used in a lot of other Mercedes-AMG models, but it's heavily changed for this car. For one thing, it has a flat plane crank, which is a pretty cool change, and they've boosted the red line by a little bit so this car can rev a little higher. It also has larger turbos than a standard AMG GT and other models that use this powertrain. The result of these changes and others is 720 horsepower. That's an amazing figure, and it's especially incredible when you consider that the AMG GTR Pro, the next model down in the lineup, has 580 horsepower. When Mercedes wanted to beat that, they didn't give this car an extra 20 horsepower, an extra 50 horsepower. They boosted it by 140 horsepower. That is a serious decision for a serious car. And in addition to having more power than all of the other AMG GT models, this car is also lighter. It's about 80 pounds lighter than a GTR Pro, which itself is like the lightweight track-focused version of the car. Well, here's an even lighter, even track-focustier version. shedding even more weight. And of course, all the aerodynamic upgrades help too, making this kind of the ultimate track weapon. And I say that, and I really mean it. This is currently the fastest production car in the world around the Nürburgring. It's faster than the 918 Spider, it's faster than the GT2 RS, it's faster than the Ferrari 488 Pista. The fastest production car on the planet around Nürburgring is this, the AMG GT Black Series. And next up, we return to the back of the Black Series. And first, I want to talk tailgate. Like I said, this is a carbon fiber piece. When you open up the tailgate, you can see it. On the inside, it's all carbon fiber. Again, this was intended to make the car lighter, except this tailgate is still really heavy. Opening it is actually pretty heavy because the giant rear wing is mounted on it. So even though this is a pretty lightweight piece and it should open easily, the huge wing makes it a little bit harder and a little bit heavier. But anyway, you open up the tailgate and you can see back here the cargo area, still pretty big, looks exactly like the regular AMG GT's cargo area and reasonably practical, especially for a crazy track-focused car like this. Cargo area in this car is open to the interior, the cockpit in front, so you can stick long items in here all the way through into the interior if that's what you choose to do. Now, this car, being a crazy Black Series model, is sold with some cool and interesting goodies that come along with it as accessories. For one thing, this black bag that says AMG. Pretty cool bag. It contains a car cover for this car, which is a nice touch, a nice thing you'll want to have if you have one of these. You also have these road safety vests. Two of them, in fact, bright yellow with the Mercedes-Benz logo on the pouch that carries them. So you'll always have vests in case your car breaks down and you're standing on the side of the road. But to me, probably the two most interesting goodies that are included in this car, one, in this black box, you have these little plates marked 1 through 7. These are camber adjustment plates for the front axle. So if you want to change your camber, again, for a little change for your racetrack setup to dial the car in perfectly for a better lap time, you can do that with these included camber plates. This car, like I said, is for serious racetrack people. And there is one other accessory that comes with this car that I absolutely love, Mercedes branded batteries for the key fob. You run out of key fob batteries, instead of having to go buy some, they provide you with these in a Mercedes branded package, which just seems great. And it's a nice little touch for someone who pays around $400,000 for an exotic sports car like this. Give them a few extra Mercedes branded key fob batteries. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Mercedes-AMG GT Black Series. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, time to drive the AMG GT Black Series. This particular one has a sticker price around $350,000, and that is before the market adjustment, which every single one of these is carrying because demand is so high for cars in general right now, but especially for limited production cars like this. This is a serious car, and I truly don't know what to expect. I drove the AMG GTR I think about 3 years ago, and we all kind of thought that would be the end of the run in terms of high performance special editions for this car. So, okay, first impressions when you get in this car, it really does feel race car-ish. I mean, you got this massive wing behind you. It's very tight. You look out, you're seeing all the holes and scoops in the hood and everywhere else. You feel low and orange. I mean, this thing feels legit. And you start to feel the harsh ride really quickly. Now, I'm in Sport Plus. Because you have a car like this, you drive it in Sport Plus. But when you do that, the exhaust goes on by default into sport mode, and so you can hear the hell out of that. And it's a rough ride. I mean, you can instantly feel it is rough in here. Listen to that. Wow. Wow. Whoa. Listen to that sound. Acceleration is fantastic, of course, and braking feels really good too. Not always the case with cars with carbon ceramic brakes. Sometimes they don't feel quite as strong as steel brakes because they're more fade resistant. They're not necessarily designed for the intense stops, but more to stop for longer. But this one still feels really, really strong. Now, a lot of people are already saying this car is overpriced. You know, hey, $350,000, $400,000, you can get a McLaren 765 LT a lot quicker in a straight line. This does 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds. Not incredibly fast by the standards of today and cars that cost $350, but this is all about track performance. This is not about straight line speed. Mercedes-Benz has tuned this to be the absolute track king, and I gotta tell you, It is. It feels like an absolute track car king. And sitting here, you can tell there were basically no compromises made to make this luxurious. If you wanted a more luxurious version of this car, you could get the GTC, the GTS, the regular GT, the GTR, the GTR Pro. Like, you've passed everything up to get to this, and so Mercedes-Benz kind of let themselves unleash to make the Black Series. There was like, do whatever you want, because there are so many other options if people don't want to put up with this car. The acceleration is absolutely brutal. That has been maybe my only complaint of other AMG models. Oh, God, it's just fighting. There's so much power. It really, really, really feels incredibly powerful. From a handling perspective, it is interesting. I will say it is incredibly precise steering and incredibly good handling, like you'd expect, but I felt the same way about the GTR. And I suspect that some of the real differences between these two cars won't actually become incredibly obvious unless you're on the racetrack. And of course, the design and style differences and the fact that this car is simply quite a bit rarer. God, I will say, if I were to sum up this car in one word, that word would be brutal. This car is brutally fast. It is a pretty punishing ride. It is very loud. It is brutal to look at. Everything, there's all these sharp corners because of aerodynamic upgrades like the wing and the front splitter and the rear splitter. Like, it's not the beautiful car that the AMG GT is, intentionally so. Everything about this car is intended to be more brutal, more immediate, and more excessive, and boy, is it ever. It's a very exciting car. It's a very thrilling car to drive. And so that's the Mercedes-AMG GT Black Series. This is a monster, an absolute beast of a car, and the most impressive Mercedes sports car since the SLS Black Series years ago. It's fantastic to see the Black Series name revived, especially for such a worthy vehicle. And now it's time to give the AMG GT Black Series a Doug's score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Black Series looks cool, though there are a lot of scoops and wings and vents. It's not beautiful, it's functional, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration 0 to 60 is in the low 3-second range, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Handling is fantastic, though I really think you have to be on a track to take advantage of aero upgrades and understand just how good it is. It gets an amazing 9 out of 10. Fun factor is huge given the sound and performance, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Cool factor is also very high, not quite on the level of the most amazing exotics, but still excellent, and it gets an 8 out of 10. For a total weekend score of 42 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The Black Series is good but not amazing, and the tech is showing its age, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is okay. It's not truly terrible, but it is pretty punishing, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Quality is okay. The interior is nice, but some materials feel a bit old and cheap, especially for over 300 grand, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is good, only 2 seats, but a lot more cargo space than most cars like this, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Finally, value, and this car is amazing. It's incredibly fast, and it's a highly impressive track performer, but it's so expensive, it only earns a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 25 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 67 out of 100, which places it here against relevant cars. It looks low, but truthfully, the Black Series does a great job for such an old platform, tying the new Porsche 911 GT3 with a weekend score. Ultimately, though, the GT Black Series is too compromised and too expensive for most people, and it will be an ultra-limited production run for collectors and hardcore track enthusiasts. And finally, I want to move back around to the back of the Black Series.